beautiful entrepreneur. I can't really believe I'm saying this, but welcome to the 500th episode of the Heart-Centered Business Podcast. To celebrate 500 episodes, we're doing something slightly different today. I have been collecting your questions for this as a Q&A episode, and we have a lot of questions to get through. So why don't we dive straight on in? I am going to refer to past podcast episodes and some free resources in this ep, so I would definitely recommend that you come over to the show notes for today's episode at tashcorbin.com/500. If any of the things that I've referred to feel like they might be something you want to listen to or explore, and we'll make sure we have those for you with the show notes. Let's jump in. Hello, I'm Tash Corbin, a business strategist and mentor based on the Sunshine Coast in Australia. The mission of this podcast is to help heart-centered entrepreneurs to make more money, and in doing so, change the world for the better. This podcast was recorded on the lands of the Gubbi Gubbi and Jinnaburra people. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Now, there are actually two sources of the questions for today's Q&A episode. The first was I did a celebratory post that I was coming up to 500 episodes and asked for your questions. And I've got to say, I'm going to share this really honestly and vulnerably. Not a lot of people ask me questions, which is totally fine. This is not a Tash pity party. And I think there are two really important takeaways from that experience. The first one is, I say this all the time, people struggle to come up with questions to ask you when you're really vague, when it's very broad. So I literally said, it's 500 episodes. I'm doing answering your questions. What questions do you have for me? And so if you think about it, that's really tough to come up with a good question. And some people did come up with some great questions, so thank you. But it was far less than you probably would have imagined. Imagine me saying to people one-on-one, hey, I'm a business mentor and I'm happy to answer any question you could possibly have about your business, about marketing, about planning and productivity, about sales, about being online. What questions do you have for me? Even then, it can be really tricky to know, well, what is my actual question? And also, then you have to explain things or you have to put a lot of words towards it, and that feels like effort. Whereas the second place where I asked for questions was in a Tashmas post where I specifically said, what are your questions for me about planning and productivity? And I got far more questions because I'd given it some context. So the first takeaway is generic questions are hard for people to ask. And the broader you go, the harder it is for people to actually come up with something. And the second takeaway is not to ascribe meaning to a low or slow response rate that isn't actually there or validated. Because I could have made it mean no one wants to hear from me. I've answered every question they possibly have. I could have made it mean that people have got enough information from me in 499 episodes. But I also know that there will be lots of people who listen to this episode intently. They'll be excited to hear what questions people have asked, and they'll be excited to hear my answer to them, even if I've answered every single one of these questions before in other podcast episodes. They might not have listened to every podcast. They may have listened to every podcast episode, but they still like to hear me talk about it fresh and from my current, more up-to-date perspective. Maybe there's something that's changed in how I define things or the advice that I would give. And so, I think it's often easy for us if we're asking questions or we're asking people what do they want to know from us. If we get crickets or if we don't get a lot of responses, we can make it mean so many things that it absolutely doesn't mean. And so I thought it was a really great way to open this podcast episode, because you might think with the followers that I have, with the audience size that I have, with the level to which I provide very practical and tangible insights and advice through this podcast, you could have assumed that I would have had people lining up to ask me questions and to get my opinion on something. And that isn't always the case, but I certainly don't make that mean that there's nothing left for me to say or that no one wants to hear what I have to say either. Okay, let's start with the question specifically for the 500th episode of the podcast. A couple of really easy ones to answer straight out of the gate. The fabulous Claire Tate, hello Claire, asked, how long has it been since I started the podcast? And I think I may have said 10 years when I replied on socials, but it's actually 9.5. The podcast officially launched with its first episode on the 7th of May, 2016, which means I will be celebrating the 10th anniversary of the podcast in May of 2026. And I also just quickly want to add to that when I started my podcast in 2016, I thought it was far too late. I thought I had missed the boat. There was too much saturation. Everybody already had a podcast and there was no point to me starting a podcast in 2016. Can you imagine that? And I just wanted to share that because I think there are a lot of people who think that today it's too late to start a podcast, and it's never too late. A lot of people think it's too late to start an online business. It's too late to start your own blog or a YouTube channel. It is never too late. And if I thought it was too late in 2016 and was fundamentally flawed in my logic and absolutely wrong about it, then it's not too late for you to get started in whatever it is that you'd like to do. Sometimes people even say that to me about writing a book. Oh, it's too late to write a book. No one reads books these days. I do think that we've seen a trend towards people listening to audiobooks far more than they're reading books, but the book needs to exist for the audiobook to exist. And also, I still buy and read books. And even sometimes I'll listen to an audiobook, then I'll buy the physical copy of the book so that I can read through it and especially find my favorite chapters and make notes and put page markers in there. I still do that to this day. So I definitely don't think it's too late for most things. It's too late. It might be too late to start a Periscope account because that thing's long gone. But it's definitely not too late to start creating content, whether that be written form, audio content, video content. There's still so much room and so much space, and particularly so much need for your unique voice and your unique approach and your unique take to anything. So it's been 9.5 years, and 9.5 years ago I thought I was too late. So how funny is that? Dr. Hayley Quinn, hello Dr. Hayley, asked, how will you celebrate 500 episodes? And actually this episode is my celebration of 500 episodes. I'm less and less into the external celebration of milestones these days. I mean, Davey and I still here and there might go out for a special dinner or have a special celebratory night at home, maybe a couple of times a year these days. But I'm more and more finding joy and finding the celebration in the day-to-day, in the gratitude of the life that I get to live and the business that I get to run. And so because I feel like it's more and more aligned with how I want to live my life and how I want to live my days, I find less and less need, I guess, to celebrate some of those bigger milestones. And also, I just think that living a life of joy and living a life of freedom, living a life where I'm really aligned with my purpose is celebration in and of itself. You know how they say the best revenge is a life well lived, but I also think the best reward, the best celebration, the best gratitude I can show is to show up for this spectacular opportunity that this business and this life has created for me. And the podcast is part of that. So I hope that that's not a disappointing answer, but I just feel less and less need to reward myself with things or events or anything along those lines. And I feel less and less need to make a song and dance about celebrating certain things. And that's not to mean I don't love participating in celebrations that other people run. And I don't think there's less validity in stopping and having that celebration, especially if it really drives and fuels you and it feels really beautiful to you. But it just, I guess I'm just not vibing that at the moment. And so I'm not going to overthink it. I'm not going to second guess it. I've always found it a little challenging to think of what is the right reward for achieving something or what is the right way to celebrate or mark something. And yeah, that I think that's just who I am. Maybe it's part of my personality type. Even, for example, people, this is such an aside, but you're used to it by now if you've been listening to this episode for more than 3 episodes. But like things like getting married. So for those of you who don't know, I got engaged to my partner, David, a very long time ago. We've almost been engaged longer than we were together before we were engaged, or maybe we've just gone over the tipping point of that. And we did actually have our wedding planned for 2020. We all know what happened then. And we'd rescheduled it for 2021 and then we had to cancel. We all know why. And so we've never had our wedding. We've never got married. And people are like, aren't you like excited to get married? Don't you really want to get married? And honestly, the only reason I want to get married is because I want to throw a big party and I want to be able to throw that party and have as many people who I want to be in the room and be there as possible. Not necessarily to celebrate David and I, but actually just like for the sake of throwing that giant party. And so when it comes to business friends, I throw a giant party every year. It's called the Heart Centered Business Conference. And so I feel like I get to connect with people in such a beautiful and meaningful way in terms of business friends. In terms of family, I spend a lot of time with the family members that I want to spend time with, and I make a point of seeing my family very regularly. And then with other friends, same thing. I'm more intentional these days about spending time with my friends, doing fun things and just chilling out and having fun together. And so it's like become less and less of a need to have the big wedding. But then if we are going to have the big wedding, I want it to be like the big wedding and to throw like a ginormous party and have an amazing time and be very generous with it. And we've been building up our savings to do that and also trying to find the right window in which to do it as well. And so I think it kind of reflects that like, how will you celebrate kind of question, because neither of us are in a hurry to actually get married. We live as a de facto relationship and have done so for over a decade now. So it feels a bit weird to like need to have the wedding. I don't know. Anyway, I just feel like it's kind of related to that. And there might be periods of time where I do feel the desire and the need to celebrate more publicly or celebrate in a bigger way. But right now, I'm just not vibing it. And so I'm not overthinking that. I'm just doing what I feel like. And what I feel like doing is sitting down and having an intimate, gorgeous conversation, answering people's questions on a podcast episode. This really lights me up and it feels really lovely to feel like we're having this back and forth. So that's what I'm doing. All right. Then I had a question. Jenny McFadden, hi Jenny, asked, can you give some insights around lead generation and list growth? Definitely. So thank you, Jenny, for requesting that. When it comes to lead generation, and I think actually when Jenny asked this, it was lead generation / list growth. And I just want to quickly say they are two very different things in my business. So list growth is growing my audience, right? And it's a very connected, highly nurtured part of my audience, but that's still audience. That's not leads. Leads are people who have self-identified as being interested in paying me money for my advice. They're interested in buying something of mine to work with me in some way. That is very different to people who've jumped onto my mailing list. And so first and foremost, I separate those two things out very explicitly, because just because someone wanted my quarterly plan on a page template does not mean that they have an intention of wanting to work with me or wanting further advice from me, that they're willing to invest money to get that advice. That a lead is someone who has that intention, who has identified a need that they're willing to invest to be able to get that need met. And it might be they're willing to invest up to $100. It doesn't mean that they're, I'll invest whatever it takes. It's that they have that intention of investing to get the help. So when it comes to lead generation, my number one piece of advice is learn how to connect with and qualify leads one-on-one, one at a time. And that comes from learning how to initiate conversations in as many ways as you can. When it comes to the invite part of lead generation, so in the client attraction process, we have reach, nurture, invite, convert. So they're the different stages. And so if people are struggling with, I have no one I could invite, I have no one I could ask qualifying questions of, I have no one that I could ask a question of to determine their intent or their level of desire to invest in getting help with this, then the answer lies in the step before, right? And so the key to a strong invite stage of your client attraction process is a really strong nurture stage of your client attraction process. And the way I recommend that you learn how to do that, learn what works, and learn how to initiate that question asking, learning how to get to the point where you're clear it's time to make that invitation, is doing it one-on-one. So the key to invite is nailing one-on-one nurture. And I think a lot of people overlook that, especially in the early stages of their business. And I think also, like, be as helpful as you can one-on-one. I spent my first 12 months of my business helping a lot of people one-on-one for free. And I had a lot of messaging and a lot of advice coming at me on socials and in one-on-one conversations with people and in the YouTube videos I was watching about, don't give it all away for free. If you're going to help people for free, do it in a one-to-many way so that you're nurturing relationships with as many people as possible. But actually, information is available for free everywhere on the internet. And if I asked you, what are the 5 most recent facts that you learned from the internet, from social media, and then who did you learn that fact from? I reckon you'd struggle to give me more than 1 or 2 of the people you learned those fun facts from. How many times have you said to a friend, oh, I can't even remember who shared it, but I saw this thing? And so there's so much push and there's so much rhetoric about nurturing relationships and nurturing your audience in a broadcast and one-to-many way. But how do you know who that's really landing with in your audience? How do you know who's got follow-up questions and further questions for you? How do you know whether someone loved that insight that you shared, but they just forgot who you are? It's really challenging to refine and improve when you're doing it all in a one-to-many way, and it's a one-way communication strategy. I'm just going to throw as much free content as I can at the internet and hope that it nurtures a relationship. Is the definition of a relationship a one-way communication channel? No, it's not. And so I really do recommend learning how to one-to-one nurture and one-to-one invite so that you can learn how to ask really good qualifying questions and refine to what really connects and what really lands for your ideal clients. Be as specific as you can as to who you are wanting to serve and what it is that they are stuck with, what their goals are, so that you can give that one-to-one nurture a really good red hot go at aligning with the kinds of people that are going to be excited to dive deeper with you, to hear about that next step. So that is my advice on lead generation. When it comes to list growth, I actually do have a whole free training on how to grow your audience. And in that, I talk about list growth being one of the most critical audiences to grow. And so I'll link to that in the show notes of today's episode at tashcorbin.com/500. When it comes to growing your mailing list, I would recommend start with high connection and learn what works and learn where people might get stuck by doing it in a high connection way. So my number one strategy still to this day for list growth is running webinars. And not running webinars that are like 45 minutes of talking about yourself and not really giving a lot of practical advice and then doing a huge big upsell and running a webinar that goes for 2 hours when you said it was going to be 60 minutes, right? I mean, running a webinar that's really helpful and useful. And in particular, for me, I know what's going to be helpful and useful because I am talking with hundreds of people in my audience one-on-one throughout my time in my business. When I first started my business, I could have one-on-one conversations with 13 people a week, 17 people a week. I would find every possible angle that I could to find as many people in my niche as possible that I could have one-on-one conversations with, that I could be helpful to. And because of the questions they asked me, because of the things they asked for advice on, I had such deep insight into what they wanted and what they needed that when I created webinars, they were webinars that people really wanted to sign up to. My first webinar had 13 people register, 1 person showed up live. My second webinar had 28 people register, 8 people showed up live. My third webinar had, I think, maybe 35, 40 people register. Half of them showed up live. So what I can see from that pattern was I got better and better at crafting a webinar topic that my audience wanted and getting that webinar in front of as many people who were my ideal clients as possible. And I also got better at ensuring that the webinar was something that people valued so much, they wanted to be there live and listen to it. And so when it comes to list growth, if you're struggling, I would definitely recommend running a webinar regularly, but running a webinar that's doing its job. And its job is getting highly qualified leads onto the webinar. And its job is also informing your messaging and sales strategies to validate that your assumptions you're making about their experiences are actually what's going on for them. Your assumptions about what they'd find valuable are actually found valuable by your audience. Your assumptions about what would the next logical step be in terms of the upsell is actually what people want from you. And there's so much we can learn through running those highly connected, highly targeted webinars on a regular basis. And that kind of leads into the next question, which came in from Agnes Udo. Welcome, Agnes. Thank you so much for your question. So Agnes asks, I'd love to hear more on all your brilliant topics, but especially how to craft high ticket offers and the messaging and speaking to your specific niche. And so I did actually do why your audience wants you to sell high ticket offers in Tashmas at the end of 2025. I'll definitely link to that in the show notes if anyone's a bit wobbly on high ticket offers. When it comes to my advice on crafting high ticket offers, I mean, it's probably not going to be the advice you want to hear. But honestly, you just need to create something and go out there and validate it. Get out there and validate it. And again, that's done one-on-one. So yes, you can make some assumptions about what people want from you when it comes to working with you one-on-one, but those assumptions are going to be based on your viewpoint. And the only way that you'll be able to validate that is by making the offer of that particular high ticket offer to highly qualified leads as much as possible. And so finding as many people as possible that you can connect with who are in your niche, being helpful and going through that process, right? You've got to reach them. You've got to get in front of them. You've got to nurture. You need to get to know them as much as they are getting to know you. Then you need to make that invitation. Ask qualifying questions. Ask questions that give you insight as to where they're at in the journey, the extent to which they need help, and their level of investment in actually paying for that help, and their desire versus their resistance. And then you've got to actually make the pitch. And the more people that you pitch your high ticket offer to one-on-one, the more insight you'll have as to exactly why people get excited about it, but also where people might actually feel like it's not the right fit for them. And then on the second part of your question about messaging and speaking to your niche, I think, messaging is one of those things that a lot of messaging people who talk about messaging in their social media like to make it sound like, oh, it's really simple and straightforward. But it is one of those areas where it needs to be very unique to you, and it needs to be unique to your niche. It needs to be super specific. So I think really the key to really epically effective messaging and offers is to be specific about the specifics, right? So there's a statement that we say a little bit in my takeoff program, and when we're talking about really nailing the messaging, is creating that feeling of, oh my gosh, you've been peeking in my windows. And of course, not meaning that in a creepy way, but just that you're able to speak to the lived experiences of your niche in such a specific way, it almost feels spooky. Like, did you eavesdrop on my conversation with my bestie yesterday? Because that's exactly what I said to that person. And so what you're doing effectively with that messaging is making a powerful, intimate observation, providing a powerful, intimate insight into what you observe of that very, very specific niche of people. And when you're able to do that, you're able to speak to their experience in such a specific way that it feels like you know them so deeply. You are perfectly positioned, therefore, to help them. And that's really what I think it comes down to when we think about super effective, super insightful messaging that really does a great job. So, it's almost like you're sharing an insight that they didn't realize was a truth about themselves. But the reason you're able to share that is because you are so observant of their experience, and you deliver that insight not in a judgmental, oh, you're so silly, you haven't figured this out yet kind of tone and way. Instead, you share it in a way that you would be sharing it very gently and very connectedly with your best friend. So it's like it's a connecting, trust-building delivery of a very insightful observation, or an insight that is based on intimate observation. And so in order to do that, and in order to do that well, you really need to be confident in your capability and your capacity to help the person. So think about a best friend that comes to you and they're complaining about something that's going on with their partner. And if you aren't really confident in how they can address it, you'll probably just be like, oh my gosh, that sucks. Oh, how dare he, right? Or, oh, how dare they do that to you? Or you don't deserve to be treated that way. But if you are really confident, I know what you need to do here, you'll feel ready to make an observation. You'll be willing to share. It's almost like you're sharing a little tough love insight, but you never share it in a tough way. You share it in a very loving, very gentle, I'm here with you, holding your hand through this kind of way. For me, that's where the best messaging comes from, because it lands so brilliantly and it does a brilliant job. But if you've got any wobbles about whether the advice you're about to deliver is going to be helpful or not, you probably won't deliver it. And so if that's something that you're struggling with, like, oh, I don't know how to be specific and clear in my advice, or I don't know how to make a specific and clear observation or share an insight that I think will really land, then the best way to get to that point is to practice and, as much as possible, do it one-on-one with as many people as you can who are in that niche, who are in that pocket of your ideal clients. And I think you'll do an amazing job of it, Agnes, as well. Thank you so much for your question. All right. And then I had a fabulous question as well from Shannon Ichikawa. Hello, beautiful Shannon. And Shannon asked, how do I make myself implement and stay on track with what good mentors tell me? And then she said, okay, well, not make, but do something more loving. And I think that this is such a beautiful question because I think it's a frustration so many of us have with ourselves, where we can reflect in hindsight and see that was really good advice that person gave me, and I didn't do that, and I feel really frustrated with myself that I didn't. And I just want to say, first and foremost, you're not alone. Like, this is such a universal experience of so many business owners. And so, like, don't allow this to in any way make it mean that you're just not cut out for business, because I think a lot of people do make it mean that, or they make it mean like, oh, I'm just not as good at this as other people, or they make it mean, oh, I'm just not as disciplined as others, or I'm just not as coachable as other people, and I'm just not very good at following directions or being mentored. None of that is true. If you ever divert from a plan when you know it's good advice, that is going to be driven by a valid feeling, right? It's going to be driven by a fear or a worry or a concern that is legitimate and needs to be understood. So instead of shutting out the worry or fear, instead of shaming yourself for not doing what you'd planned, my advice is lean in with curiosity and honesty. So asking yourself questions like, oh, what was I so afraid of that made me decide not to do that? What was I avoiding by avoiding doing that? And then you can ask questions like, well, what would be needed to keep me on that path? What would be needed in order for me to actually do it? What is staying in this pattern of avoidance achieving that I subconsciously want or need? Do I want or need more rest and more spaciousness? And if I actually did what I was told, I would get busy, and then I wouldn't be able to take Wednesdays and Thursdays off to just potter around the house and get things tidied up. Is having an option to back out of being a business owner something that is keeping me feeling really safe? That was definitely a big one for me in the early stages of my business. And I had quit my job and started my business full time. And yet I was looking for part-time contract roles after 6 or 8 weeks, despite the fact Davey and I had agreed that it would be 2 years that I could really give this a red hot go and then see how it went. And it was him having to say to me, hey, we said 2 years, it's been 8 weeks. Stop looking at jobs and get back into your business. Like, you've got this. It was actually borrowing his belief in me and his belief in my capacity and capability as a business owner, and to really make a red hot go of it, that kept me focused on doing the thing and, following through on my plans. Sometimes it's that I don't actually want to be seen. I don't want to be visible. I know I definitely had moments when I, probably in 2 and 3 years into my business, where it started to feel safer not to do the thing, because I didn't necessarily feel like I looked like the kind of person who had the level of income that I was starting to make in my business. I remember getting close to $500,000 in my business. I think it was my 3rd year in business, and I was getting close to $500,000 for the year. And I was like, I don't look like a $500,000 a year business owner, right? And there was so much judgment and fear. I remember, this is going to be so embarrassing, but I share those things. I remember looking up professional teeth whitening as something that I needed to do before I was allowed to speak on stage at a big conference that I'd been asked to speak at. And I was like, oh my gosh, they're going to expect me to turn up with white teeth, right? Like the silliest thing now in hindsight. And like there was literally nothing wrong with my teeth, really. They just weren't like Hollywood level white, which I think looks really creepy these days anyway. But it was so funny for me because it was just that stepping back with curiosity and doing some journaling one day. And I was like, why am I so intent on getting my teeth whitened before speaking at this event? What is wrong with me turning up with my teeth as they are? And it just unraveled so much for me about this perception of what people might think I look like and think about the way I dress, being someone who earned $500,000 a year and spoke on stages. And, you know, of that magnitude as well. It was a pretty well-known, well-regarded conference at the time. And interestingly, a lot of what came up for me was just the fact that I had been following a lot of very fancy-looking entrepreneurs at that point in time. And I was really inspired by them. I had a lot of ambition. And so seeing $1 million and multi-million-dollar and, you know, $10 million a year business owners felt really inspiring and encouraging for me. But at some point, it became a standard that I didn't think I could live up to. And so then what I did as one of my first steps was look for people who didn't have shiny white Hollywood teeth who had multi-million-dollar businesses. I looked for that and I purposefully followed more creators who dressed like me, who had non-traditionally beautiful faces like me, who weren't necessarily what you would think of when you thought of multi-million-dollar business owner, well-regarded, sought-after stage speaker. I purposefully looked for people who are a bit outside the box because I realized that part of my role as a business owner was to be the 6'2", slightly off-white teethed, not perfect, not wearing designer label clothes looking person that they could follow. And it started me on a really interesting journey of sharing more real-time selfies on social media, doing live streams on Periscope. Oh my gosh, Periscope got 2 mentions in this episode already, I think. Anyway, which was a live streaming video platform. Before that was available to us on Facebook and Instagram and, you know, some of those more prolific social media platforms at the time. And so I started doing more of that. I cried on a live stream and didn't delete it. I left it up. And that was a really powerful breakthrough moment for me as well. So the one thing I want to say to you, Shannon, is that your frustration with not implementing and not staying on track with what mentors have told you to do or what your plans are, right? Especially where you know the advice is good. You know that it is a good strategy for you to follow. That frustration is the key to your breakthrough. If you just turn towards it with curiosity and honesty and ask yourself, how is it currently serving me, right? What is it currently keeping me safe from or allowing me to keep one foot in and out of, or, you know, where is it allowing me to avoid a fear or a worry? And overall, is it really serving me in alignment with where I want to go long term? Because it's often serving you in the short term, or it's serving you in a very micro way. So, for example, with the visibility thing, yep, it is keeping you safe from negative comments about your appearance, right? I could keep myself safe from, oh my gosh, your teeth are so weird, right? Oh, you really don't have, like, who would ever say that to me? I've never had anyone comment on my teeth before, but, you know, apparently I was really worried about that in 2015 and 2016. So, you know, yeah, in the short term, it will protect me from having someone make a random comment like that, or, you know, being on stage and having someone say, oh, you know, maybe they turn to their friend and say, oh gosh, she's really not as put together as I expected for someone who's making that income level. maybe she's not as successful as I think she is, right? Because that's what it came down to. I was worried that people would perceive me as a grifter. If I didn't show up with the beautiful white teeth, they would think I couldn't afford the beautiful white teeth. And if I couldn't afford the beautiful white teeth, where did my $500,000 of income in the last year go? Right? So now if you dive deeper into it, there's so much more to uncover. There's so much more to unpack. And part of that fear that I had was being part of a mastermind group where it felt like as our time together unfolded, every single member of that group confessed to a big lie, to a big omission. One of them had been the poster child for a launching course because she'd had a $100,000 launch in her first course launch, but she had neglected to tell people she'd spent $155,000 on Facebook ads because she was already a millionaire before she started her business through another business that she was part of. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I'd been bamboozled by that. I'd held her up in such high esteem as being this like scrappy entrepreneur like me, and she'd had a $100,000 launch in her first launch, and I'd made $3,800 in my first launch. And I was so ashamed and embarrassed at my lack of success, but I hadn't spent a cent on ads because I didn't know she'd done that. And then there was another person who was in that mastermind, and she had revealed that she had faked her results in working with a really, really high-level mentor because she knew that that mentor would platform her on social media. So she had pretended that she'd gone from $2,000 a month to $55,000 a month in working with this person for just 3 months, but she hadn't. But she knew that if she said that, she would be showcased as a success story. And by being showcased as a success story, she'd get the followers she needed to make that kind of money. And that's what happened. I was like, oh my gosh, right? And so I felt like I'd been let into this secret room where everyone revealed that all wasn't as it seemed. And here I was, my poor neurodivergent self who's like couldn't tell a lie without breaking out into a wild rash and then having to go and rectify it 1,000 times over, right? Like I just couldn't fathom lying about something like that in order to gain success or clout or followership or anything like that. Like I was just so brutally honest online, and I'm still like this brutally honest person about everything that's going on for me. And so it really felt like the teeth thing was a reflection of a bigger thing. Right? Here I was assuming everyone was as successful as they were saying that they were because I took them at face value because that's how I show up in the world. And here I was being told about all the ways that I had been misled by peers who I had, some of them, I'd really put them on a pedestal. I was so excited to be in the room with them. And by the time that year-long mastermind ended, I was like, I don't think any of these people are my people. I'm actually only friends with one person out of that mastermind to this day. And there were like 17 of us in that group. And that's really heartbreaking, right? Like to have the shine come off and realize that more than half of the people who I thought, had some kind of amazing success that I could learn from and some insight. And like more than half of the insights that they were sharing were falsities and omissions and ways that kind of they'd faked it till they made it kind of thing. And I didn't want to do that. And so here I was worried then that everyone perceived me as lying about my income because I didn't have shiny Hollywood white teeth. Of course that's going to come up for me. And so is that really serving me long term though? Do I need to look like what a traditionally perceived $1 million business owner looks like in my head in order for people to trust that I have a $1 million business? And actually what I want to do is role model being my whole self and not needing to ascribe to those things and actually recognizing that a lot of the people that do present themselves as super wealthy and super successful A lot of that is so that you will behave differently around them because of the perception of their wealth. And does that actually mean that they have a strategy that is a good fit for you? Does that actually mean that their advice that they're selling is actually going to work for you? And does that mean that I want to be part of the making sure that everything looks as it needs to look? Or do I want to instead have my work and my word be more valuable than how I appear? And so for me, I made that decision. No, it doesn't serve me to keep myself hidden until I look like a millionaire. It actually serves me to show up and speak more honestly, more truthfully, more vulnerably, and just look like how I look every day and demonstrate how that is available to everyone who is also like really questioning, do I look fancy enough to be $1 million business owner? Because at the end of the day, how fancy do you need to look? And am I willing to spend $200,000 on looking like a successful $1 million business owner rather than spending the $200,000 on investing in my business and in my personal development and in my mindset and in my strategy? I'd rather spend the money on actually getting the results than looking like someone who got the results. So I know I've gone really long-winded with that, Shannon, but honestly, for me, there's always a reason. And I don't think that we should spend 6 months unpicking all of the reasons and da-da-da. For me, the big revealer of the reason is the action and the resistance to that action. So step 1 is come up with a plan that I am excited about and that I want to implement. Step 2 is get started on implementing it and pay attention and notice with a lot of curiosity where I resist, where I try not to do it, where I avoid, where I can see myself really self-sabotaging, either because I don't follow through or I do follow through, but I do it in a way that I know is not going to be successful. So hopefully that answers. Thank you so much for your question, Shannon. Which brings me to the questions that were asked about planning and productivity. What a beautiful segue. So the first question about planning and productivity comes from Dr. Denise Furness, which is about having too many ideas. And she says, I love ideas. I love dreaming up new things. Then doing the work is sometimes not as much fun. The main question I have is how do you prioritize the ideas and ways to focus and get the mundane done when you want to dream of fun new projects but really need to get the current thing finished. So the first thing I would say in relation to prioritizing your ideas would be that my first step whenever I have a new idea or something new that I want to play with, I ensure that it's validated. And so sometimes that means doing some mundane things to prove that my idea is actually going to land. And if I'm not willing to do the mundane to get that shiny new thing off the ground, then chances are it's just a distraction. So that's a really practical way that I kind of prioritize which ideas I want to implement first. Am I willing to go out there and validate those ideas? And when I do, am I getting insights that give me the information that I need and the validation that I need to know that it's actually going to land and it's something worth seeing through? And then in relation to the other part of your question about prioritizing getting them done and doing the mundane over jumping into the new and shiny objects, I think I've covered a lot of it in answering Shannon's question, but the other piece I'll add here is really around knowing yourself and what works for you, and not what works for you in a certain environment that you're no longer in. Having come from a corporate background, what worked for me in corporate doesn't work for me when I'm working for myself, because I don't have that sense of external accountability. I don't have someone providing regular performance reviews. I have to do that for myself. And so as someone who works for themselves, I need to know myself far more in depth, and I need to know what works to get me focused far more than I ever did as an employee. Something that I shared in the productivity episode of Tashmas, from which this question came, was about the fact that I'm not necessarily motivated by a reward at the end of doing something. Instead, I need to take a pleasure-first approach to productivity. That means that in order to get myself in the mood to do some of those more mundane things or see through a project that I previously had lots of excitement for, but I'm starting to falter in my excitement for it now, I need to ensure I set myself up so that I experience pleasure at the start of my day, that I really follow what my body wants, what my brain wants, what I want, rather than dangling that as a reward after I've done what I need to do. So for me, it's really taken a willingness to experiment with that and a willingness to potentially fail. I definitely worried that if I took a pleasure-first approach to productivity, all I would do would just be laze around, would just be focus on the fun stuff, and I'd never want to actually do any work. But I have proven to myself time and time again that that's not true by giving myself the opportunity to give it a go. I also think that this can be reflected in the way that we treat ourselves and the way that we convince ourselves we should be able to make it work. So even though you might know that the best thing for you to focus and get stuff done is to be in a really empowering, really beautiful work environment, is to work with accountability, is to co-work with other people, you convince yourself that you should be able to do it on your own though, and you should be able to squeeze it in between this task and that task. And so you get frustrated with yourself because you're not doing what you know you need to do, but you're also not giving yourself the right environment to get it done. So a great example of that for me is this podcast. Yes, I can record this sitting at my desk in between client calls, but is that actually the right environment for me to create and record podcasts? No, it's not. I can get it done as a little in between, but it's not my best work when I do it that way. And I struggle to get motivated if I know I need to jam it into a 30-minute break and I don't have time to actually create a conversation. I don't have time to really consider what I want to say. And in 30 minutes, I might be only able to record 1 or 2 episodes, and that's not rewarding for me. That doesn't feel pleasurable. What feels pleasurable for me is batch recording a bunch of podcast episodes together and having spaciousness in which to do that. Often I do it in a different room in the home, or I'll go on a solo retreat to do podcast recording because I know I'm going to enjoy it more. It's going to be a better quality result. It's far more likely for me to see all of the tasks through that I need to do to get a podcast episode done, because it's not just recorded. It's also making sure I've got my cover art clear. I know what I'm optimizing for in terms of the keyword phrases, all of those pieces. If I really want to think it out and do a good job, sitting at my desk in between client sessions is not the right way to do it. And yet, for a long time, I forced myself to do it that way because I should have been able to do it that way. I should be able to just record a podcast episode every day in between client sessions. So why aren't I? And ultimately, the answer to that question is in the question itself. Yeah, I should be able to, but am I going to design my business and my work environment around a bunch of shoulds, or am I actually going to set myself up with the right environment for success? Now, that might mean bringing in a different team member. That might mean working with a mentor in a retreat environment more consistently. It might mean being in a solo working environment more consistently. You know what works best for you, or you have the capacity to experiment and figure it out. And let's prioritize that because, I know for you, Dr. Denise, you are the breadwinner. You are a super successful, sought after, amazing speaker who gets flown around the world business class to speak on your topic and to speak about the work that you do. And you deserve the very best of the best working environment to do your work. You deserve the right team. You deserve the right supports. You deserve every skerrick of whatever it is that you need. And I don't care how frivolous or random it is to anyone else in the world. If it means something to you, if it feels like it's going to help you, you deserve it. And I share that for every single other listener to this podcast as well. For me, I used to be really mean to myself about the fact that I need different colored Post-it notes to put my tasks on the wall in order to get stuff done. I was embarrassed by it. It felt childish. But I've since recorded a podcast episode about my $1 million business secret, and that is Post-it notes. I can reframe the very thing I was embarrassed about as the random key to me making millions of dollars in my time as a business owner. And when I think about the things that I've written on Post-it notes and then done, and the money I've made from those tasks being completed, why would I be embarrassed about it? Other than it's conditioning and programming from the industry that I came through, the people that I had in my life at certain times, and the way that often these things are spoken down about or criticized or shamed, we get shamed for. When I remember, this is a really weird connection, but it just came to my brain, so I'm going to share it. I went to a high school where they provided you with your student diary at the start of every year. And it was a requirement that you had your student diary at all times while you were at school. And I had mine, and I had it color-coded, and I had different pens that I would write in. And I never had a problem with using my student diary. I kept on top of things. Looking back now, it was actually the perfect ADHD tool for me. It was very limited in the space that it had each day because it was a week to an opening. And so it meant I had to be prioritizing exactly what I was going to be doing each day. It was actually a really good practice for me to self-manage and task myself and keep up that habit. And I'm really grateful that they made us have that at all times. But there was one time where I was in a class with a teacher that wasn't my regular teacher. It was a substitute teacher, and it was my friend Tara's homeroom teacher, and he was a real cranky old man. And he asked me to come up to the front of the class and show my student diary because I was putting something in it. And he's like, bring that up here. And so I had to go up and show him. And he said, this is atrocious. What is all of this drawings? What is all of this like, you should just be writing your homework in this. And I literally got in trouble for using color in my student journal. And like that stayed with me. And even though when he looked at it in detail, it was very detailed, me self-managing, and there was nothing frivolous in there whatsoever. So he let me keep it. He was actually threatening to take it away from me and make me start over because it was such a mess. Even though it's very well organized, it was just very colorful. And so I ended up being allowed to keep it. But that stayed with me, this thing that like at a glance, it looks childish and messy, therefore it's no good. What you've done is no good. And so again, it's just remembering that a lot of the times, the ways that we limit ourselves, the way that we judge ourselves for what we want and what we need, it's often not coming from us. It's coming from someone else who judged us for something. And so whatever it is that you need in order to get to know yourself and to provide that working environment that really works brilliantly for you, you deserve it. You absolutely deserve it. And it might be, for those of you who are listening, it might be that you can't afford to hire a permanent team member right now. But there's always a way to access something that makes that friction reduce. So you might not be able to afford to work with, say, a permanent team member who does 5 hours a day, 4 days a week. But you can afford to hire someone for 1 hour a week right now. And even though it's not all of the hours you wish that you could hire them for, that 1 hour a week will make such a difference to your capacity, but also it might be your accountability. It might force you into a little bit more organization, and that organization means that you're a little bit more strategic with your prioritizing, and that makes the difference that allows you to stretch to 3 hours a week, that then allows you to stretch to 5 hours a week. Don't get into that all or nothing thinking. Think about what might be able to help you. Is it external accountability? Is it color? Is it having someone feed you tasks one at a time? And right now you can't afford that to be a human, but you can set that up as reminders that come through on your phone. Or you can hire someone for 1 hour a week to set up a system that feeds you tasks one at a time rather than them doing it themselves and being on call every hour of every day, right? There's always a way. But one of the things we need to overcome first is that sense of worthiness and deserving, and also releasing some of the shame and embarrassment that we need something like this, because we constantly drill it into ourselves that we should be able to just write down our to-do list each day and do it. But if it was as simple as that, we'd all be doing it already. And the very reason why that doesn't work for you is the very reason why you are an entrepreneur. You are the perfect person to create and run your business, because that's what I am discovering more and more for myself as well. If I was the kind of person who could write down a to-do list and just follow it straight away, I would be neurotypical. I'd probably be working as an engineer in a random 9-to-5 job, and I never would have taken the risk to start my business. My willingness to play with the unknown, my willingness to ideate and to try things that have never been tried before also is linked to the fact that I struggle to write down a to-do list and just follow it. Would I give up my entrepreneurial, problem-solving, risk-taking brain in order to be the kind of person who can write down a to-do list and just do it? Nope. No, I wouldn't, because I wouldn't have a business. And that's something that I think that we can really learn from and really interrogate when it comes to the way we treat ourselves. We can be really frustrated that our brain doesn't work in that linear way, absolutely. But at the same time, if your brain did work in that linear way, you probably wouldn't be a business owner right now. And would you give up being a business owner just so that you could write down a to-do list and follow it? I wouldn't. And it's taken me a long time to get to this level of self-love and really understanding how valuable it is to be someone who thinks very differently to the norm. And I wouldn't give it up. I absolutely wouldn't, because here's the thing. There's 11 billion ways to overcome resistance to following your to-do list. But there's not really any kind of training or any kind of school that you can go to that can turn you into an ideating, entrepreneurial kind of person, right? And so, we can totally overcome so much of that resistance and self-sabotage and all of that, but there are just people who are in their 9-to-5 jobs doing their very regular work and following their to-do lists beautifully. They'll never be able to create a business out of nothing the way that we have. And I don't want to swap with them. And I hope that you don't want to either, because ultimately you were designed this way so that you could do this work, not so that you could sit at a desk working for someone else, doing what you're told like a diligent little human. Not my cup of tea, and I hope it's not yours either, okay? Right. And that does also tie in with the question that Claire Kerslake asked. Hello, Claire. So she said, I know you've talked about getting motivated either by the carrot or the stick. So I did talk about this where I'm not really motivated by getting in trouble, right? Not really motivated by a carrot dangling at the end of a task. I'm a pleasure first kind of person. And so Claire says, I think I am possibly more motivated by doing something for that dopamine reward before the action. There is an underlying concern, though, that I'll just keep doing the fun things and not come back to the action. Now, my response to that is you need to give yourself a chance to come through and deliver without judgment, without shame, and without perfectionism about it. Because I also think that for a lot of us who naturally tend towards that personality type or that way of being motivated, we have deprived ourselves for an extended period of time. So I've talked previously about how I was really afraid that if I took a pleasure-first approach to productivity, that I would just sit on the couch and eat nachos all day. I would just veg out. I would just laze around and I would never find that intrinsic motivation to get stuff done. The reality is that whenever I dabbled with a pleasure-first approach, I did veg out for an extended period of time, but that's because I needed it. That's because I had been withholding rewards, pleasure, the things that I wanted, the environment I needed to succeed for so long that it took some time for me to really decompress. It took some time for me to get bored of sitting on the couch watching TV. It took some time for the reward of allowing myself to go for a swim in the middle of the day to stop feeling like, oh, it must be knockoff time, so my day is over. Because that's the only time I ever allowed myself to go for a swim was when all my jobs were done. And so there's some rewiring of your brain that needs to happen. And, you know, one of the things I hear over and over again is the best thing for the human brain is actually boredom. And so I needed to get to the point where I was experiencing a little bit of boredom, and then that inner motivation started to resurface again. But I had been deprived for so long that I did really lean in to, okay, well, I'm just going to treat myself. And maybe it's a week of just treating yourself and you get nothing productive done. But if after 2 days you're berating yourself and going, oh, see, look, I am going to be lazy forever because, you know, I've deprived myself for decades, but I gave myself 2 days worth of pleasure first approach. And in those 2 days, I didn't magically turn into a productive machine. Of course you didn't, right? But that is the kind of logic that we're working with here in a lot of cases. So it's important that you give yourself a chance, and you can do it in little tiny, tiny ways. But ultimately, I measure my productivity based on the results that I achieve with the work that I do, rather than on the output that I generate with the work that I do. Because if I measure myself based on output, I'll sit at my desk and record 55 podcast episodes in a day. But those 55 podcast episodes are not going to be good. They're not actually going to generate results. The podcast episodes that generate results are the ones that are thought through and that I've created from a space of feeling abundant and feeling at ease and feeling really generous and nourished. I need to do those things to create something that's going to generate results. And so I don't measure myself based on the number of podcasts I release each year. I look at how has my podcast contributed to the results of my business. And that's trickier because the line of sight is a little less obvious. But I know that if I just measure myself based on what I've produced, I will turn myself back into a widget producing machine. But the ultimate result of that is my results will decline. My business will stagnate. I will not experience the growth trajectory that I can experience if I allow myself to be in that really abundant, easeful, strategic state of mind. I don't make good decisions when my amygdala is in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. I make great decisions when my brain is in that parasympathetic rest and digest state. And I can't be in that rest and digest state if I'm constantly berating myself or telling myself I'm not allowed to rest until X, Y, and Z have been produced. It just doesn't work as effectively for me. And all I can say is I hope that you give yourself a chance to give it a go and prove to yourself that you are someone who is intrinsically motivated and that you can be very kind and loving and nurturing to yourself, that you can treat yourself with absolute dignity and respect in this pleasure-first approach and feel proud of what it is that you generate in terms of results as well. You absolutely can do that. The second part of Claire's question was, how do you come up with your list of fun things to do first? Did it naturally evolve or did you experiment? I'd love to hear your story about what worked for you. So I think for me, it was just giving myself the freedom to experiment and play and not be good at stuff and not finish things. So another big lesson that came up for me was this recollection of being as a child, being interested in exploring lots and lots of different sports and hobbies and fun things to do. But the constant lesson that I was taught was if you start something, you have to see it through. So if you start at a sport, you have to do not just one season, you have to do it for at least 3 seasons and see it through. Because if I'm going to buy you the soccer boots and the shin pads and that kind of thing, you better be playing soccer for the next 3 years because you've got to make use of all of those things I've got to buy you for it. And so, that came for my parents out of necessity. We weren't very well off financially when I was growing up, but I was still inflicting those same rules upon myself as an adult who was making multi-six figures in income. I'd never allowed myself to go and do an art class because then I'd want to buy all the art supplies. And if I wasn't any good at it, I'd probably want to give up on it. And so therefore, you best not set yourself up for the heartbreak of having to see yourself through or see that through. And so, I think that that's also such a revealer of where we might limit ourselves or hold ourselves back from the things that are joyful for us and that do bring us that sense of pleasure and ease and excitement to get work done. So it was definitely more the experimentation side for me, but even just noticing how I limited myself in that experimentation and creating a lot of permission for myself to try things out and not be good at things straight away or not enjoy things and decide not to do them. That's totally fine. And the more I paid attention to what I enjoyed and what I wanted to keep doing versus what I didn't want to keep doing, the more insight I gained, not just in how to take a pleasure-first approach, but also in how all the different places that would show up. It really made a huge difference to even things like how I structured my desk, how I structured my day, because there were insights from those things. For example, when I first started pottery, there was this big philosophy conversation at the start of the class about we need to practice detachment. And they made us destroy the first 5-10 things we made on the pottery wheel to prove we were detached. And it sounds sick in hindsight, but it's so true, right? Because if I think about it now that I do pottery far more consistently, there are times where I've made something and I think, oh my God, this is going to be amazing. And then it's gone to fire in the kiln and it's cracked. and I have to be okay with, okay, well, I'm just going to make another one. If I just sit and get all frustrated and anxious and cranky and upset about this thing because I became really attached to it and it was perfect and I felt like it was going to be the most amazing thing, like that's the exact opposite of what I want, right? That's the exact opposite. But that has carried over in lessons in so many things. In free webinars that I've created, and I thought it was going to be a spectacular success, and it got like a really tepid reception. Or I created a video and it glitched and the recording was lost. And because I had practiced this detachment in pottery, I was able to apply that same principle and say, okay, well, I must be meant to re-record it, and when I do it the next time around, it's going to be even better in some way. I'm not going to be attached to recreating the exact same thing. Instead, I'm going to create something with the same intention and see what I end up creating. Because often it's just a stream of consciousness of the types of stories that come to mind, the types of examples that come to mind, and I trust that and I go with it. And so even just the experimentation of the types of things that I do in my pleasure first approach, that has taught me so much about productivity and strategy as a business owner, far beyond just that being a great way to motivate myself to start my day. It's so powerful. Oh, I love these questions. So the next one comes from Emma Johnson. And Emma said, in construction, there's an 80-20 rule that says 80% is preparation and 20% action. What ratio would you apply to planning and doing in business? So I would just say, just on a little technicality, there's a difference between planning and preparation, right? So in construction, it's not 80% planning, it's 80% preparation. And that preparation includes planning, but it also includes resource scheduling. It also includes labor planning, right? So there's a lot more in the preparation phase. Similarly with like painting a room, right? Preparation isn't just planning how you're going to paint the room. It's literally preparing the surface. It's preparing by covering the carpets, doing all of those pieces. So I think a lot of the things that we do in business would also be categorized as preparation, but they wouldn't necessarily be categorized as planning. There's a big difference between business planning and preparation. So, for example, this podcast, I would class in the preparation side because the podcast on its own isn't necessarily going to be making sales, nor is it delivering services for my clients. But what it's doing is building relationships. It's building trust. It's growing my audience through search engine optimization. It's growing my audience through the content that I can then share and promote on social media. I couldn't do podcast ads without the podcast existing. So it kind of fits in the preparation phase. So rather than get all caught up in the detail of what constitutes planning versus preparation and could I make 80% preparation and 20% doing kind of fit for business, which I think you could, instead I want to share some of my ratios. So when it comes to business planning and decision making, I do think that it's that like 20% in planning and deciding and 80% in doing. And so I do it sort of the opposite. So if you were to do the 80% of planning and preparation in building and then 20% of doing, I would do 20% of planning and decision making. So thinking about what I'm going to do and then planning out what I'm going to do, deciding what I'm going to do and setting myself up so that I can do whatever it is. And if the doing is recording podcasts or if it's sales calls or it's delivering a takeoff call, right? That's my doing time in my business. So I'd say 20% in the planning and deciding and 80% in the doing. But I think another ratio that makes a big difference for how people perceive the balance of tasks they do in their business is that I divide my client attraction process into equal parts as well. So when I talk about the client attraction process in its most full terms, it's reach, getting in front of the right people with the right messaging, nurture, building a relationship. They get to know me, I get to know them. Invite, that is where I'm making the invitation for qualified leads to step closer to considering an offer. So that's asking qualifying questions, lead generation, lead management. Then convert, that's making the sale. So whether that's a sales webinar or sales emails or sales pages, sales and promo posts on my social media, doing like not even just sales conversations one-on-one with people, but also in my webinars, having that sales pitch and practicing that sales pitch. Conversion happens in so many different ways. And I think for a lot of people, they just try and direct everyone to a sales page and let the sales page do the job. But for me, the conversion part of the client attraction process gets an even portion of my time. As much time goes into conversion as goes into reach for me. And that surprises a lot of people. And then the final stage of the client attraction process is delivery. Because if you don't deliver on your promises, if you don't deliver well for clients, then all of the above is not necessarily going to be sustainable. Because if you've got people who are consistently underwhelmed by what you deliver, not getting results from working with you, not satisfied with the service delivery, if that's happening for you very consistently, you're not delivering, you've got an unsustainable business. So when we think about that 5-step client attraction process, reach, nurture, invite, convert, deliver, for a mature business, I divide my client attraction into those 5 portions evenly. So if I think about the doing time in my business, I actually divide that up evenly into reach, nurture, invite, convert, deliver. And so then the other portion of my time, so if that makes up the 80% of doing, public facing in my business, then the other 20% of deciding and planning also needs to include the behind the scenes managing my team, behind the scenes making sure I'm looking at my cash flow, right? And so if I divide that in the 80-20 way, then I really need to be focused. I really need to be in my zone of genius as much as possible. And the reason why I caveat that by saying for a mature business is because if you're still in the startup or early to intermediate growth phases of your business, chances are you're going to be spending a different ratio of time on different parts of that process. And actually, inside the Takeoff program, we have a module that we do at the end of each stage called Task Tracker. And that's where I make recommendations on proportioning out the time that you have available to you between those different very important tasks in your business. And the reason why I do that in Takeoff in those stages is because if everyone broke up their time the same way that I did in the Takeoff program, when they're still in those early stages, then they wouldn't actually have enough time to be doing the marketing and sales activities and the client delivery activities that they need to do a lot more of in the early stages of business to validate that their products and services deliver on their promise, to validate that they've got the niching, the messaging, and their offers really clear and in demand, to validate their client attraction process, right? So when I was developing my own client attraction process, what do I do to reach people? I needed to spend more time on that than I do now, because now I know what works best for me. I know what the best use of my time is when it comes to growing the reach of my business. But also because I'm at that more mature stage of business, I can appropriately outsource the things that I don't need to be doing, but that are still critical to that success. And so I've become almost meticulous in interrogating what needs to happen in order for me to achieve my goals, and what of those do I need to do versus what do I need to outsource to someone else who's going to be far more likely to do a great job of that, and they can do that for me rather than me needing to be involved in that process. So hopefully that answers your question, Emma. I mean, I think it's a little apples and oranges trying to compare construction and the preparation phase of construction versus planning and doing in business, because I don't know that they are comparable, but I love the conversation that the question has raised. And hopefully I've given enough depth in the answer to satisfy your curiosity. All right, let's go to another question. This one comes from Karen Simmons, and she said, in relation to implementation, do you like setting success parameters or KPIs with each of your strategies? And I think my answer to this is yes and no, right? I do love metrics, especially I love looking at my metrics and KPIs when I'm making decisions in my business, because if I have the data that I need to make a strong decision, a grounded decision, a decision that I can actually justify with data, then I'm far more likely to see that decision through and actually follow through on what I've decided with it. If I'm making decisions in my business and I have no data to back it up, it's just a theory, I can get a little bit flaky on actually implementing it. I can get a little bit wobbly if the signs don't look good in the early days. And so I'd much rather use data-driven decision making. But I do also know that if I get too overly analytical in the micro data, I spend more time interrogating and interpreting data than I do actually making a decision and moving on and implementing. So I will measure certain metrics in my business on a monthly basis. And then if I've got a new idea or I've got something I'm trying out, I might put in some dates for milestones of when I want to get stuff done. And I'll put some measures of how will I know this is going to be successful. But I don't actually look at those measures until I know that I've completed the initial rollout. And actually, that leads into another question that Christine Collins asked. So I might do that one now as well, which was around when there's been lots of trial and error, how do you know you've got a winner or if it's a dud? So firstly, I don't assess the effectiveness of a new strategy or something I'm trialing in the midst of doing it. I give it a red hot crack. I give it far longer than you'd expect to be in the focus, in the spotlight. And I don't ask, oh, will this be good or won't it? Through that process, all I'm focused on is how do I make this work? How do I make this a winner? How do I make this awesome? How do I ensure this has the best chance of success? And if I stay focused on those things, I know I'm giving it the best chance of success. Because at the end of the day, experimenting with something new only to find out it doesn't work or it hasn't worked for me means that I could have been off track, right? Because if I've committed to this new thing and I'm giving it a go and I'm experimenting with it, that means that there's an opportunity cost. There are other things that I didn't get the chance to do whilst I was putting time and effort into this. So I better make sure it's worth it. And so I would say 90% of my experiments work because I'm super committed and dedicated to making it work and I give it the opportunity to work. Secondly, I do assess with data, but I give it plenty of space and time after I've implemented, I've recovered, I've had a chance to really gather my thoughts about it. And then I'll sit down and look at the data, and I'll also look at how I felt. And I'll also look at, like, what did it feel like to actually do it? Was I excited for it? Does it feel like it lights me up? Because that's critical data as well. Just because something is financially successful doesn't mean it needs to stay in my business forever. There are products and services that I've previously offered that I just don't offer anymore, not because they're not good and not because they're not a winner, but actually because even though they do really well financially, I don't particularly feel lit up by it, or it doesn't feel like it's the most strategic use of my time compared to some of the other things that I love and adore doing in my business. And so, that can be really challenging to assess and make that decision. But the more that I trust myself and the more that I do that consistently, the better I get at being able to tell. And then the other thing is that once I've assessed it with data, I don't look at that data at first asking myself, is this good or not? I look at that data to find, how can I make this even more effective and aligned in my business? That's what I'm looking at the data with. Because the other thing I do before I decide if it's a keep it or leave it is, if I really liked it, right? Like, if I want this to be a thing, and in order for me to experiment with something, I really need to want it to be a thing, right? So if I want this to be a thing in my business, I give it a second launch with refinements based on data. So my first assessment of the data about whether, of a new improved or a new something in my business, let's say I've created a new online program. My first assessment of that program, once I've launched it and I've given it lots and time of space to be, really successful launch. Everybody knows about it. I've done a good job and I've delivered, and I'm starting to see how people are feeling about the actual delivery and the product itself. My first data review is not, should I keep doing this or not? My first data review is, how do I improve this when I launch it a second time? And it's the same with a freebie. If I create a new lead magnet, it gets at least 1 month's launch. In that 1 month's launch, it gets at least 30 to 50 promos on social media and to my mailing list. And I don't mean I send 30 emails about it, but between my posts on socials, my own platforms, as well as in other people's groups, in my group, my end of my podcast promos, my emails out to my mailing list, 30 to 50 times. If someone actually read every single piece of content I created for the month, if they, were an avid follower of me, they would hear about this new freebie 30 to 50 times in a month. And then I look at the data, not asking, is this a good freebie or not? Did it convert or not? I don't care. The number one question I'm asking is, how do I make this even more effective and even better? And I look at that data, I look for where I can make those improvements, and I go again. And I give it another month and another 30 to 50 promos in that month. And then I'll make an assessment. Okay, does this go into the regular lineup of freebies that I have in my business, or does it get quietly retired? And that's a huge decision for me to make, but I can only make that decision once I have enough data and I've given it enough opportunity to be successful. Otherwise, I'm just wasting my time creating a bunch of stuff that never has a chance to succeed. And that is the very definition, I think, of shiny object syndrome. Jumping from new thing to new thing, idea to idea, new freebie to next freebie, new product, new course, new thing. And not one of them has ever had a chance to succeed because it's never actually had that full launch, that review for improvements, and that second launch to really assess its effectiveness. The number of people who tell me, oh, no, I'm not doing that webinar again because it didn't work. And then when I ask them, well, how do you know it didn't work? What did you do? They promoted it 3 or 4 times. They had 10 people sign up for it. They never sent all of the follow-up emails because they were disappointed with the number of people who signed up, and then they didn't make a sale. And so they have decided the problem is the webinar. No, it's not. The webinar is not a dud webinar. That webinar did not get its time in the sun and you didn't do it justice. So it's not the webinar's fault, and that webinar is not a failure. What we need to do is give it the opportunity to do its job. And unless you are confident that you've given it a red hot go, you've reviewed for improvement, and then you've given it a red hot go again, I'm not interested in the data, in trying to assess whether it's a success or not. Because actually you don't have enough data because you didn't give it enough of a go. You didn't give it enough time in the sun. So that is my 3-part answer to your question, Christine. I think that really relates to Karen's question as well about setting those success parameters or KPIs for those new projects. The next question came from Colette Dalton. Hello, Colette. So Colette asked, how do you initiate tasks when you're in task paralysis or decision overwhelm? So my first step is generally to talk it out. So if I can't decide on something, I'm overwhelmed by the number of decisions I need to make, I'll talk to a mentor or a business friend or a member of my team, or at a stretch, I'll talk to Davey, my partner, about what I'm struggling to decide and just kind of extrovert it out because I am an extrovert and I like to think by talking it through. So that's usually what I go to first. If not that, I'll often pull a card. So I love tarot cards. I love oracle cards. Often when I pull a card and do some journaling about that card, it helps me to really land and decide on what's most critical, what I need to initiate first. I also do love to do the Heart Shield journal, which is, it's a 3-part journaling process. So part 1 is, what are all the things I don't want? Part 2 is, what are the things that I do want? And part 3 is, well, what do I want to do? And whatever the first thing is that I write down as what I want to do, generally I'll do that first because it comes from a space of really having considered my thoughts. And I find that it's very powerful as a journaling exercise for me to do. Other things that I can do to really initiate if I'm feeling I'm in a little bit of overwhelm is to pick an easy or fun starting point. So, you know, the eat the frog thing, right? Where it's like, if you know you have to eat a frog today, I mean, why are we eating frogs? But anyway, and you don't want to do that, right? There's a whole theory that says just do that first, like do the yucky thing first. I think that works for people who are very reward orientated, but that's not my personality type. I say often, I'm not a frog eater. If I want to really find my motivation and my initiation to do something I might be avoiding, the best thing I can do is something fun first or something really easy first. So sometimes I'll even message my team and say, what's something I can do in 20 minutes that would really get you unstuck for something you're waiting on me for? So it activates my obliger. I really want to help someone else. But it also is something that's nice and contained. I can do it nice and quickly and pass it on, and then it's done. And that gets me in this momentum. I feel like, woo, I'm ticking things off. And so I'm excited to do more. And so often then I'll do the hard thing. I'll do the thing I've been avoiding. So that's a good one for me, is to find something easy or fun as a starting point and just do that first. And I do have like a fun tasks list that I sometimes play with here and there in the back of my day planner, or it will be in our Asana, which is a task management system that my team mostly use. I don't use it a lot, but I've got often quick and easy tasks that I've been collecting up that they're not necessarily a high priority right now, but I'm excited to do them, or it'll be a fun thing for me to do. Sometimes it's like a little bonus module for the accelerator, or re-recording an old webinar that I really loved delivering, but I know that it needs a little update. And that's something I can do very quickly. Quickly go and check through the slides, update a couple of things, hit record, yap away for 40 minutes, new webinar recorded, that's done. I can move on with my day. I can hand that over to the team. They know what to do with that. And then I can move on and do something that might, be a little bit more blocked or a little bit more tricky. It's really important that in hearing this, you get to know yourself though, right? Because another thing that I tend to do if I find myself in overwhelm is take the day off, guilt-free. Or it might even just be take the morning off, guilt-free. If I sit down to work at my desk and my brain is just like, no, I don't want it. I don't want to be here. I don't want to do this. Sometimes the best thing I can do is just step away. But I know that that doesn't necessarily work for everyone. And that for some people, that just creates more pressure and more urgency and more drama. And so that isn't the thing that would work for you. But I know that it works for me. I know that it gives me a reset. Often what happens for me when I decide to take the morning off is that, like, let's say I sat down to start my day at 8 a.m. and I just wasn't feeling it. I don't have anything on in the morning. There's nothing on today. There's nothing I need to do. Or, there's probably a few things that I need to do, but hey, I'm the boss. I can give myself a free pass to do it another day. So I'll go, okay, you know what? I'm just going to take the morning off. I'll wait until 1 p.m. I'll come back to my desk at 1 p.m. and then I'll do A, B, and C. And I'll write a little list of the things that I'm going to do when I come back to my desk at 1 p.m. By 10 a.m., 2 hours later, I'm itching to sit down at my desk. And so by taking the morning off guilt-free, that's very important, and just deciding to go and do something fun, just deciding to go and stare off into space for the morning, or go and catch up on that TV show that I've been listening to, or take the dogs for an extra walk and listen to another podcast, or rearrange my wardrobe, or whatever it is that I feel like doing, I'll be itching to get to my desk well before I said I was going to sit back down at my desk, because I love what I do. I love this business. And I'm so full of ideas of things that I want to do in this business, things I want to create for you. And so sometimes just the stepping away for an extra little period of time for me is enough for me to get my head clear, get really focused on what's a priority, and then just start taking action on it. And so taking that morning off guilt-free often is a really good way for me to get that little reset, because what's also happening is when I'm rearranging my wardrobe, I'm also organizing the filing cabinet in my brain. That's how my brain works. And one of the reasons why I might sit at my desk and not want to get anything done is I just feel like I've got a mess of 30 things all clamoring for my attention in my brain, and I can't get the spaciousness to actually see them clearly. So by distracting myself with a wardrobe reorganization, or organizing all of my stationery and markers in my craft room, or sitting down and doing some beautiful art journaling, by sitting and doing something like that, keeping my hands busy, I'm automatically organizing the filing cabinets in my brain at the same time, but not by putting pressure on them and shining the spotlight on them. It's reorganizing behind the scenes. That sounds really weird, but feels like what it is when it happens for me. The other thing I think is really critical here, though, is that I also ensure that in my CEO date every month and in my quarterly planning every single quarter, I look for other decisions that I have to make regularly that are creating decision fatigue for me. I am really ruthless when it comes to reducing decision fatigue. So that is something that I am paying attention to a lot, because I know that if I've had to make 15 decisions before I sit down at my desk, I have to decide what we're eating today. I have to decide when are we eating today. It's usually around food. I have to decide what we're doing tonight. I have to decide. You know, when I have all of those things, if I've got a bunch of decisions that I have to make before I even sit down at my desk, I'm done with decision making for the day. So we have a meal box service. I never have to think about what foods I want on the day. I am the one who picks the meals, and I do that in batches every 2 to 3 weeks. I'll go through and pick all the meals that we're going to have for the next few weeks. That's all done in one big batch. I never have to think about it again. Davey can prepare whatever meal he wants out of that box for me, and it's going to be something that I want because I picked them. And so that's really made such a difference to my life, because my day previously looked like Davey popped into my office at 12:30 in the afternoon most days and said, "What do you want for lunch?" And then I'd have to think about all of the foods in the world that I could possibly consume right now. Which one do I want to eat now? And 9 times out of 10, I would say, okay, I'll have chicken Caesar salad. He'd be like, okay, I'll go to the shops and get the ingredients. By the time he came back at 2 o'clock and actually put that chicken Caesar salad together, I wasn't even hungry anymore. I'd gone past hunger and into absolute fatigue. Or I'd gone and grabbed a packet of corn chips out of the pantry and eaten them because I was so hungry thinking about food. And so it was a constant derailment of my day. And you might think, well, that's very privileged of you, Tash. And yes, absolutely it is. We are so privileged to be business owners and to live lives like this and to be able to do stuff like this. But it doesn't mean it was any less derailing. It didn't mean that it's any less critical that I resolved that. And after many other strategies that we tried, including doing meal planning together once a week, me making David his very own personalized recipe book of recipes that I loved to eat. Oh my gosh, we tried thousands of different ways. It took us 6 years of experimenting with all the different ways you could think of that he could help me with making sure I had some food each day. Because if he didn't, I wouldn't eat a thing, or I would just eat said corn chips, right? Not very nourishing, not very good for the old brain health, let alone the body health. And so, because eating nourishing food each day was so important to me, it was such a priority, we had to come up with a solution. We had to come up with an answer that didn't contribute to decision fatigue, that didn't contribute to delayed meals and therefore snacking on the most random things in between, that didn't derail my day. And the meal box service is exactly how we did it. And so, you know, I think being meticulous in finding ways that you can eliminate decisions from your life, really, really powerful. I wear navy Lululemon leggings most days. On the bottom half, right? I have lots and lots of different tops and different colors, and I get to choose a creative, decision of what color top will I wear today. But every top I own goes with those leggings. So I don't have to make a decision about what I'm wearing on the bottom half. It's Lululemon navy leggings. The Align Lululemon 31-inch super high-rise leggings. And I own several pairs of them, and I always have a clean pair in my wardrobe, and I never have to think about it. One last thing on decision fatigue. The more I reduce my decisions that I need to make on a day-to-day basis, the more I find that I need to get rid of. And that's been really powerful for me to see just how overloaded with decisions I used to be compared to where I allow myself to be involved in the decision making now, even within my business. So my team would come to me and say, what do you want to use for XYZ? And it's like, there's another decision that I need to make. I don't want to have to make that decision. So even just enabling my team and really empowering my team to make decisions on my behalf and to set the parameters of where I don't want them to come to me with decisions has significantly changed how mentally draining my business feels to me, because I'm not in decision fatigue within the business either. So thank you so much for that question, Colette. I think that's a really, really juicy one. I hope that that's helpful for you as well. Next up, we have a lengthy question from the fabulous Suzanne Faison. I hope I'm saying Faison right, Suzanne. I've never asked you how to pronounce that. So the first one is there hope for me to be able to send written communication in my business more quickly, especially emails, so I can enjoy life and a flexible schedule without guilt, especially for those of us who've historically taken longer to do written work, especially in school, completing written assignments, etc. Is it really just more practice? And so, yes, it is. But I think when it comes to practice with writing emails, for example, it's more a concept of mindful practice. So the way that I significantly reduced the time it took me to write my newsletters each week was actually not just writing my newsletter more consistently. It was mindfully paying attention to where I slowed myself down writing newsletters, because I was taking a long time to write my newsletters because I was overthinking what I needed to say. I was worrying about whether I had earned the right to share a promo in that newsletter. I didn't necessarily have a structure when I first started my newsletter, so it felt like it was this long, rambling mess every time I wrote it. And so it would take me a long time to edit it and reorganize it into more linear kind of structure. And so one of the big differences for me was when I just decided my newsletter would always be love note, feature content, offer. So I had an offer in every email. I don't have to overthink whether I've earned the right to make an offer or not. If I have my feature content in every email, well, all I'm doing is sharing the first few sentences of that content and a link to go and listen to the podcast episode. So feature content for me is my podcast. It might be a YouTube video for someone else. It might be a video blog for someone else. It might be a written blog for someone else. For me, it's the podcast. And so really paying attention to where I'm overthinking things, where I'm being judgmental of myself, I'm trying to edit myself as I go, which does not work for me as a writer. I just need to write everything down and then edit it. But then when I was editing it, making sure I wasn't getting into perfectionism about editing it into the most perfectly written newsletter ever. Especially, I think, when it comes to written content and written communications as an online business owner. If it's broadcast written communications, like sending a newsletter out to your mailing list, does anyone listening to this podcast remember the first email I sent to my mailing list? No, they don't, because none of them were on it. I think Claire Riley may be the only person in my current audience who was there when I first started my business, right? Because we knew each other in a workplace capacity before I started my business. So, I think that often we've got this perfectionism around, well, this is going to be there forever. And, this is the most important thing I've ever written in my business ever. But ultimately, it will fade into oblivion by next week. And so I think as well, just giving yourself permission to just share a little bit and not have to say everything all at once. And a little bit of structure often makes a huge difference to the time that it takes. The other thing is I've had several clients that I've worked with who used to spend hours crafting emails where all we've done is just got them to measure the time it takes. So I had one client where I said, okay, I want you to actually turn a timer on when you write your newsletter next week, and then turn the timer off when the newsletter's ready. And she came back to me in her next session and said, I wrote my newsletter in half the time because I knew the clock was counting down. That on its own made her halve the time that it took. And then I think she went from like 3.5 hours to under an hour and a half. And then we just set her a mission to say, okay, you're going to write your next newsletter in 75 minutes. So instead of setting a timer and the job will just take as long as it takes, now you've got 75 minutes and an alarm is going to go off at 75 minutes. Wherever you're up to at that point, you just send it. And what we did was I said, you just send it to me. And I will do less than 90 seconds of tidying I will send it back to you and you're not allowed to change it. You just have to send it out. And that's the agreement we came to. The following one, she did it in 60 minutes. The following one, she did it in 55 minutes. Then she did it in 50 minutes. And by the time we got to 50 minutes, she didn't need me anymore. She was like, I've got this. I'm going to get this down to a 30-minute task every week, because she could see how much of a difference it had made just by setting a timer, setting a goal, and it meant that there wasn't time to overthink. It meant there wasn't time to get in that perfectionist thinking. So yes, it is just practice, but it's mindful practice, and it's practicing in a way that really incentivizes and encourages you, as well as works with how your brain works. And so, if, for example, you're not a particularly linear thinker like me, then having that little bit of structure, so you're just responding to a prompt for each one. Okay, what's my love note? What's the top thing I want to tell people in my love note? What's my feature content I'm sharing this week? What's the first 3 sentences of that? What's my offer? Okay, have I got one that's pre-written, or do I need to write from scratch? If I'm going to write it from scratch, I'll set a timer for 15 minutes. Okay, let's write this offer. Whatever I've got, I send it. So it's that like really mindful practice, I think, is far more powerful than just doing it for extended periods of time. Now, the second part of Suzanne's question was how to not get discouraged or jaded by the shiny 5-hour work week promise. I know you've covered a bit of this, and I'm so grateful. These episodes have been monumentally helpful to me. How can I stop feeling bad that it's taking me more than the shiny 10 hours for business success? So I think the first question is, why does it make you feel bad, right? And this may have something to do, I know a little bit about Suzanne's background. So I'd say, Suzanne, this may have a little bit to do with your creative background. Suzanne has come through, performance and entertainment industry. And so let's think about how people who are really naturally talented performers who find their craft easily, right? How has that been programmed in for you as being talent, right? Ease being programmed as talent. And so whenever I want to think about that, I think about role models who are very open and honest about the effort and their desire to try to work hard at their talent. Because someone who's naturally a great singer, for example, right, the fact that it came easily to them almost feels like it was ordained upon them that they would be a singer. And someone who has to work to build their instrument and be a good singer might be considered as less than, right? They're not as good because they had to work at it. And I mean, this is probably an obvious one example for me because I'm such a Swiftie, but I think about Taylor Swift. The first time Taylor Swift performed at, I don't know if it was the Grammys, it might have been the VMAs, where she sang with Stevie Nicks, she wasn't at her best, right? It wasn't the best live vocal performance that anyone had heard in the world. In fact, there was that music critic who was really mean about that and really critical of who she was and said, like, now we all know Taylor Swift can't sing. She's no good performing live. She might as well just give up. That was literally what this old man wrote about her. And instead of taking that feedback as a sign that she should wither away and shy away from the work, she took that as a challenge to become a far stronger live vocalist. And now she's just completed a 2-year world tour performing 3.5 hours every single night. She can perform the Eras set list running on a treadmill for 3.5 hours straight because she put the work in. And for me, I'd much rather follow role models who are open about their workload and the practice and diligence that it took to get to where they are than someone who's like, oh, I just am naturally good at it and everything comes easy to me. because then there's nothing I can learn from that person. So where are you putting people up on a pedestal because they're naturally good at something, or you assume they're naturally good at it because they don't share their work, they don't share the diligence of the effort that goes into it behind the scenes. They hide that away like some shameful secret, and they're just painting this picture of ease and everything comes naturally, and I've never had to work more than 10 hours a week in my entire existence as a business person. Unless you are someone who has had that exact same experience. Oh, I've never had to work more than 10 hours as a business person. Everything comes easily to me. Everything is sunshiny. Everything just magically works out. Then I would argue that following that person and taking that advice from that person is not going to serve you, because you're not going to have the same experience as them, because it doesn't come to you naturally like that. So I would much rather that you follow people who are open about the fact that they had to do the work. One of my favorite people that I refer to so consistently in these podcast episodes is Denise Duffield-Thomas. And one of the things that I love and admire and respect so much about her journey is that in her first year or two of business, she was running free goal-setting workshops for anyone who could bring a crowd together. She was getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, doing one-on-one coaching sessions with people from overseas because they said that that's the time that worked for them. And she wanted to get the practice in. And so I definitely think that there is a balance. I don't love to follow someone who, when they share what they've got on for the day, they're a very successful business owner. They've been in business for many years. They're at a very mature stage of business, and yet somehow they still have 48 things on their to-do list today. I don't want to follow someone like that. I don't ever aspire to be someone who needs to do 48 things a day on my to-do list in order to be successful, right? So I'm not talking about glorifying that hustle mentality or that like burn yourself out or work yourself to the bone mentality. I'm talking about people who are dedicated and diligent in refining their skills, and they're willing to put the work in to work that practice. Another great example of that would be Julie Parker. I love the message that she runs Beautiful You Coaching Academy. She's an Aussie as well. I love the way that she really values and talks about building your skill set and your craft as a provider. She's teaching people how to be great coaches, but she doesn't say, just do my qualification, just like listen to my lessons and you'll be a brilliant coach, because she understands and absolutely recognizes that in order to be a great coach, you have to coach a bunch of people. You have to practice. You have to get better at it. It's a skill set. And just like being a great singer is a skill set and it's a practice and it takes work as much, there are probably some exceptions where they don't need to put in the work, but the vast majority of talented performers who are really good at and can keep doing it year in, year out, and who stand the test of time, they put in the work. And as much as a great sports person, right? They're at training 4 days, 5 days a week in order to put out that amazing session in the game or at the Olympics or whatever it is. It's the same with, I think there's some kind of saying, I'll butcher it, right? Like the amazing gold medal that you win at the Olympics is not actually won on the track at the Olympics. It's won on the training ring. I don't know what they're called, oval, field. I don't know, right? It's the dedication and the diligence to the training and to the practice. And so it might be that it's time to unfollow a bunch of people who are making you feel less than because you have to put the work in. It may be that it's time to find role models who talk about the diligence of developing their skill set and their practice. It might be time to drown out a bunch of that external noise and focus on what you actually want. Do you want to run your business as a 5 hour a week business eventually? Okay, well, that's a great goal to set for yourself. But what capacity do you have now? And are you willing to put in a little bit of extra effort now or a bit of extra hours now? And I mean, it sounds to me like you do have the time to put in now, but you're judging yourself for putting in 40 hours a week into your business because other people put 10 hours a week into their business and they're more successful than you. But number one, that's often not the case for when they were at your stage of business. But number two, if you've got capacity now and you're happy to put that in, don't let anyone else's hours of work or judgment about hours of work mean anything about yours. That's up to you. Which actually brings me to the third part of Suzanne's question, which was, there's especially so much to do in the phase of setting up all the things when you're starting out. I imagine it discourages other people. I do want to go outside and play. I'm just, there's a few brackets bits here. But I feel like having more time is actually a detriment because I just fill the time because I'm used to working 10 plus hour days in jobs. Yes, I've worked 20 to 30 hours straight a couple of times with only 1 or 2 hour breaks. The entertainment industry is brutal. And so if you come from that environment of I've worked 10-hour days very consistently, sometimes I'm working 20 to 30 hours straight, then it might create a feeling that hard work and long hours feel really safe for you. And that's okay, right? It doesn't have to be all or nothing. I'm used to working 30 hours straight, but I want to work 5 hours a week. And so I'm just going to immediately jump to 5 hours a week, right? It doesn't have to be like that. So number one, whenever I'm trying to reduce my work hours or be more strategic with my work hours, I ensure I'm really clear on my time purpose outside of my business. What am I doing that's not working on my business? How am I doing things outside of my business for joy, for fun, for ease, for learning, and really noticing what I think and feel about what I'm allowed to do outside of my business as well. Because sometimes we can only allow ourselves to do a craft if it's going to be productive, right? How many of us have started doing something? Oh, I've started painting. Well, now I have to sell the paintings in order to be allowed to make more paintings. You know what? You could do 11 billion paintings and then just donate them all to thrift shops. You could do a bunch of paintings and just gift them out to your friends, or line the halls of your home with all of these paintings that you've done. Or my nana was a very prolific artist, and we have a lot of her artworks were lost in a fire, but I have a few of them and I got some reframed. And when I pulled them out of the old frames and flipped them over, every single canvas had another picture on the other side of the canvas. And sometimes when we got them reframed, one of the ones that I got reframed, the framer actually said, well, this has made it really thick. So is it okay if I actually just peel off some of this paint that's on the back of the canvas? Clearly she didn't love this artwork because she didn't frame it with that side out. I'm like, yep, no, you can peel it off. And he would peel off 5 or 6 layers of paint. She just repainted over the same canvas over and over again. Talk about working your craft, right? And so really pay attention to what you think and feel about what's productive, what's allowed, what are you allowed to do, what are you allowed to spend time on, and find that time purpose outside of productive business time or productive working time, because the more I'm clear on what I want to do with my time outside of my business, the more strategic and the more focused and disciplined I am with the time inside my business. And then I would also set yourself gradual goals to reduce the load and notice your resistance and pop-up thoughts and ways that you tell yourself you're not allowed to do that. So let's say last week you spent 28 hours trying to work on your business. This week, your goal is 25. And notice where you get cranky at yourself for setting a 25-hour goal. Notice where you say, well, that's not fair because I'm in startup, I need 40 hours. Oh, that's not going to work because of X, Y, Z. Just pay attention. Write it down and see, is it actually true? Or is this just my past experiences trying to keep me safe from an unknown threat or an old pattern that I don't want to fall back into. Then I would also say you're allowed to experiment. You're allowed to play. You're allowed to hustle. You're allowed to chill. You're allowed to veg out. You're allowed to relax. You are allowed to do whatever it is that you feel like doing or whatever it is that you want to do. You are an adult. And I think a lot of us actually go from not being treated as especially for women, right? You're not treated as a whole, full decision-making adult when you're in school. Everyone knows better than you. I even remember my little brother was allowed to have all of his pocket money. I wasn't allowed to have mine. And the only difference between him and me was our gender. And so I was constantly being fed this message that I couldn't be trusted to make good decisions for myself. My movements were far more monitored. My decisions that I made about schooling, about university, about taking a job or a part-time job, I constantly sought approval from others because I was constantly fed the message that I couldn't be trusted to make decisions for myself. And then I went into a workplace where every decision had to be checked by a superior. Every strategy had to be overviewed by someone else. I had to be supervised. I had a supervisor all throughout my work history. Even when I became a senior consultant at a consulting firm, everything I still had to report through to the department head. Every single thing, every decision. And so I created a neural pathway of I can't be trusted to make decisions for myself. I can't be trusted to be in charge. So when I started my business, I immediately created more bosses for myself. My mentors were my boss. My mindset practitioner was my boss. My clients were my bosses. And I didn't feel confident in making decisions for myself and truly trusting myself and trusting my instincts. Even when I had a 20K month in my 6th month as a business owner, the minute I stepped into a webinar where that person was talking about everyone has 50K months and everyone's selling passive income products and everyone's selling online courses, my default reaction to that webinar was not, oh my gosh, like that's really cool, but look at me, I made 20K in my 6th month as a business owner. My default reaction to that webinar was, oh, I've made a terrible mistake. I am so silly. I am so silly. And not only have I made a mistake for myself, the business advice that I've been giving to my clients on how they can do what I've done is actually the wrong advice, because I've been teaching them how to sell high ticket one-to-one packages of services, and I should have been teaching them how to sell passive income. I should have been teaching them how to sell online courses. I have made a fundamental, monumental mistake and I have to fix it. And then I derailed my business for 12 months chasing this whole passive income, online courses thing, and had a $3,800 launch of my first online course and then had an $800 month the month after, right? I completely messed everything up. And still at that point in time, I did not review that through the lens of going, oh, wow, that webinar really misled me. It led me astray. I instead was like, well, there must be something wrong in the way I've done it. There must be something wrong in what I've decided. There must be something wrong with my implementation. Here's 62 reasons why I messed this up. Because my default position was, I don't trust myself. I can't be trusted. Someone else is the boss of me. And that was a huge turning point for me to actually land that insight that the problem wasn't that I couldn't be trusted. The problem was that I believed I couldn't be trusted, so I was constantly beholden to everyone else's opinions about what I should be doing. I was constantly swayed by everyone else talking about their successes and what their strategies were and what they decided was the right strategy for everyone else based on their individual success. So that was when I finally decided, I was 3.5 years into my business, when I finally decided I'm going to stop following a bunch of other people and I'm just going to go back to what I know. I'm going to focus on what I know works. I'm going to focus on me. I'm going to focus on my zone of genius, and I am going to figure out what my business strategy is, what my pathway is. And it took me so long to stop making other people the boss. It took me so long to finally learn to trust myself and to give myself the permission slip I'm giving you now. You are allowed to experiment. You're allowed to play. You're allowed to hustle. You're allowed to chill. You're allowed to veg out. You're allowed to relax. You're allowed to do it your way. And one of the best ways to figure out what your way is to lean into your resistance with curiosity. And if you cannot figure it out, just find a way to work it for you, right? So whether it's coming up with more fun ways to run your business, whether it's jumping into a co-working, so you've got that body doubling, you've got someone else visibly seeing you sitting at your desk working, if that works for you. Accountability, someone that you report to. If you do that accountability through a team member versus a business bestie versus a mentor, it doesn't matter. It's all good. Whatever works for you. Find what works for you and lean into your resistance with curiosity about what it's telling you about yourself and what you need in order to feel confident and comfortable and to trust yourself as the leader of your business, because you are the perfect person to lead your business. Oh, I love these questions, Suzanne. So good. All right, we've got a few more questions and then we'll be wrapping it up because I know this is a monumental mammoth episode. The next question comes from Valeska Waldron. Hi, Valeska. So it's a two-part question. How can I have some sort of structure in my business and still allow time for shiny things, particularly when working with a small amount of hours each day? Well, I really think when it comes to that balance between structure and flexibility to chase the shiny objects, you need to create a business case that you believe in for structure, right? Because I had so many people telling me over and over again when I started my business, a little bit of structure makes a huge difference. A little bit of structure allows flexibility and freedom. A little bit of structure will help you to get the day-to-day stuff done as quickly and efficiently as possible so that you can play and experiment. But it didn't matter how they worded it. It didn't matter how they told me about it. It didn't matter how they justified it. I didn't believe it. And I didn't see the business case for it. It was only when I decided, okay, I want to have some structure. I need to build the business case for why structure is needed for me, that I actually did it. So build the business case for you. Refine your structured time to the 20% of the Pareto principle that is the one that delivers 80% of the results, right? 20% of the effort you put in delivers 80% of your results. So if you're diligent about finding out what that 20% is, at really interrogating where that 80% of my results come from doing this, that takes me 20% of my time, and that's the 20% of my time I'm really going to put the structure around and make sure that I get that done no matter what. If you've got a business case that lands for you, that makes sense to you, that excites and ignites you, you'll do it. So find what works for you. I love having a toy box for my shiny objects to go and assess them properly and strategically later. If I followed every shiny object or every single idea as soon as I had the idea, I would be the most scattered and distracted person and I would not have the business that I have today. I had to find a way to calm my brain about the new thing. And that wasn't by just telling myself off or not allowing myself to even consider it. It actually came from going, ooh, that's an interesting idea. That's something for me to explore later. Let me put that in the toy box. I'll take a few notes so that I remember what I was thinking and I remember the idea and I remember the key points. All right, now that's tucked away in the toy box. I'll get to that later. Now back to the task at hand. The more consistently and effectively I did that, the less I was distracted by shiny ideas because I was collecting this information, right? I was collecting evidence that, yes, ideas are amazing. Yes, ideas are brilliant. But the more I can apply my ideation brain and my creativity to the task at hand, the more rewarding that will be, and the more effectively that will grow my business. And that's what I did. And that's really what the toy box gave me. And then the other thing I like to do is find shiny, fun stuff within the structure I've got. So I have a little structure of how I start my day. I try and start my day with a mighty 90 every day. So that's 90 minutes of focused time on what the priorities are for me, for my business, for the growth of my business. But within that 90 minutes, I can find a lot of fun, creativity, and play. So I'll start that 90 minutes by drawing a tarot card and thinking about, what is this tarot card telling me? What's the lesson that I need to listen to today? I'll set my initial timer for 15 minutes and I'll see if I can get the biggest, most important thing done in 15 minutes. Or I'll see, can I get all of my help desk outstanding tasks up to date within 15 minutes? So I know that's done for the day. I get to play with other stuff. If it's a follow-ups day, I will open that up and I will see if I can send every follow-up within the space of a Taylor Swift song, right? So I can find newness and excitement and the dopamine hit and the creativity and the playfulness in the very, very mundane everyday things because I've got that structure. I know that I'm not going to spend any more than 90 minutes listening to Taylor Swift songs getting follow-ups sent, or I'm not going to spend any more than 90 minutes on these things. So I need to get some stuff done. And it's not going to be 90 minutes of faffing about. It's going to be 90 minutes of focus, but just because it's focused doesn't mean it needs to be dull and boring and disciplined and, rigid and cold and harsh and mean and critical. That 90 minutes can be the most fun, joyful, creative, playful part of my day. It generally involves stickers and colored pens and Post-it notes and playfulness and experimenting and creating competitions with myself. Sometimes I'll spend the first 5 minutes of my Mighty 90 making myself a little 3x3 bingo card, and then I work my way through things by making a little X through the middle, and then I'm going to fill in the ones that I haven't done, right? So however I create that playfulness or that excitement or that novelty doesn't detract from, I'm getting really critical business growth things done right now. This is super exciting to me, and I can create that sense of playfulness and fun. Next up is from Suzanne Burke. So hi, Suzanne. The question was, I love the reframing of making your current strategy work over constantly searching for new ideas. Now I have an action plan. Why is it that I don't seem to be actioning it? I fill my work days with my weekly tasks and can't seem to get to the meaty stuff and feel more productive. What are your thoughts? Okay, so I think I've covered a lot of that in previous questions, but I would also say just lean into this, right? Clearly for you, the weekly tasks feel safest. What I want to know is why. Why is it that doing those weekly tasks is so much safer than doing the meaty stuff? And why is it that only the meaty stuff makes you feel productive? What's going on there? Knowing that all of your feelings are valid, however you feel or whyever you feel that way is absolutely valid. What is the negative consequence of you doing this meaty stuff? Why are you keeping yourself safe? And what is it specifically that you're keeping yourself safe from? And that might be serving you in the short term, right? Maybe the meaty stuff keeps you safe from rejection. And so you don't want to face rejection today because you don't feel like you've got the stamina or the bandwidth for it. Great. Awesome. In the short term, that's really serving you. But in the long term, is avoiding rejection actually serving you? And if not, how can you create a sense of it's safe to be rejected, or it's rewarding to be rejected, or, really chasing that rejection down by being far more out there with your ask, far more out there with what you're asking of those around you. I think that there's that whole trend of like rejection therapy on TikTok. I mean, all that really proves to me is that men will go a long way out of their way to avoid going to therapy. But I do think that there is some validity in getting used to rejection, especially as a business owner, because like I get rejected on a daily basis, really, but that rejection isn't as soul crushing and, day ruining as it used to be when I first started my business, because it's just part of the journey. It's part of what we do as business owners and as entrepreneurs. So I think really the only extra layer I would add is just really leaning into what is it about the meaty tasks that you're keeping yourself safe from? What is it about the meaty tasks that feel like they're different and therefore it doesn't feel as safe for you to do it, and why? Next question is from Kaylin. I think it is Kaylin or Callan Williamson. How do I effectively create a business plan around marketing that's affordable with good returns and not overwhelming? Well, I think, again, I've probably answered this a little when I talked about the client attraction process, but I would also say craft a client attraction process that's really straightforward and simple for you. So if you created a client attraction process where each stage had 2 actions. So for reach, there's 2 things you do. For nurture, there's 2 things you do. For invite, there's 2 things you do. For convert, there's 2 things you do. Then it simplifies it right down, and it requires you to be quite strategic in what the 2 things are that you choose. And I would actually start in all of those phases doing it one-on-one to validate first, because 1-to-1 reach, 1-to-1 nurture, 1-to-1 invite, and 1-to-1 convert, all free. So it's not just affordable, it's free. And the more people that you need to reach at once, the more time and or money it will cost you to do that. So if you're looking for good return and affordability, I would actually say the most effective use of your time is to find 1 person a day to reach, 1 person a day to nurture, 1 person a day to invite, 1 person a day to convert. And if you don't have 1 person a day to convert, the answer lies in the step above. So I don't have anyone to convert today, so I'm going to find 2 people to invite. Or I don't have 2 people to invite today, so I'm going to find 3 people to nurture. Right? And if I find 3 people to nurture today, that means tomorrow I'm going to have someone I can invite. And then the next day I'm going to have someone I can convert. So the more that you do that 1-to-1, the more high conversion it will be, the less people you'll actually need to reach, and the more cost effective that will be. So hopefully that answers your question. It was a really juicy one. And the final question I have is from Christy McKenzie. And Christy said, I've always wanted to know, how do you pick just 3 to 4 things if everything needs to be done still? And I think this is referring back to that productivity episode of Tashmas that I did at the end of 2025. I'll link to that in the show notes of today's episode. And the question I would say is, does it really have to be done? Right? And at the end of the day, yes, there's probably 20 things you could do today, but when you force yourself to choose the top 3, you really can't bury yourself in non-important activities, right? So have a look at that giant list of things that you need to do and ask yourself, what are the 3 things that are the most likely to develop the most momentum or results for me today? And you learn what that is by doing things. And the longer you tell yourself, but I need to do 15 things a day, the longer you'll collect evidence that you need to do 15 things a day. The longer that you keep convincing yourself that you have to be busy, you have to do 11 billion things, the longer it'll take for you to really understand how to prioritize. So it is a learning by doing thing. And I kind of had my hand forced into this in the early stages of my business, because there were several times where I just didn't have the capacity to do all the things I was experimenting with, all the things that I'd convinced myself that need to be done. And so it really forced me to consider what is actually working the best. And I even remember, I think I was like 5 or 6 years into my business. And when I looked at what I wanted to do that day, when it really came down to it, some of the most powerful and impactful things I could do were not the sexy, big things. They were tiny. It was send a follow-up to that person who indicated they might be interested in working with me, and I never connected with them, or I never followed up. It was send that email to the client who's got one session remaining to ask them if they'd like to set aside some time after their final session to talk about where to from here. It was setting up that automated welcome email to my mailing list that that simplified everything down. I used to have like a 6 email welcome sequence, and it did nothing. It was so ineffective. All it did was got a lot of unsubscribes. I was like, you know what I need to do is I just need to get rid of all of those emails. I need to send one welcome email that asks people to tell me about their business, because that's the most important thing that I need to know from every single person who signs up to my mailing list. I want to know about their business. So instead of sending them 16 podcast episodes they might like to listen to, and 4 freebies that I created back in 2015, and 12 fun facts that they might want to know about me one day, I got to clear all of that out. What's actually important here? What's most important is that they feel like I'm actually interested in learning about their business, because I am. And if every person who joins my mailing list answers that question and tells me about their business and what they're stuck on, if I have the capacity to respond to them one at a time and say, oh, wow, that's such a cool business idea, or, oh, I don't quite get it, can you tell me a bit more about this, or whatever it might be, if I can genuinely respond to every single person who replies to that, that is 1,000 times more effective at actually getting me clients than all of the free resources in the world that I could throw at the internet. It absolutely is. And I was deprioritizing one-to-one connection for the potential of one random free resource to maybe go viral or get shared by someone who I didn't know that might then get an extra 10,000 people on my mailing list one day. So that's the exception. It's not the rule. So I was a lot of the time organizing my priorities and my to-do list based on what might make me the exception today, instead of what do I know is actually going to contribute to results here. And the evidence that I had in front of me overwhelmingly was the more people I have conversations with about their business and what they're working on, the more clients I get. So why would I not take that data and make changes to how I organize my time? And when I did, things took off. Things really started to solidify in terms of not only the leads I was getting and the sales I was making, but so much more depth of insight into my messaging, so that when I did create freebies, they actually resonated with my audience. So that when I did make offers, I was speaking to the very thing that someone just told me about 2 days ago who signed up to a $2,500 package. That insight is 1,000 times more effective compared to my random theories about what they might be worrying about. So when I prioritize talking to people within my audience one-on-one by changing things up and putting those things at the top of the list, it made it easier for me to succeed each day, and I made more money more quickly. But if you keep trying to convince yourself that every single thing on your task list is the same level of importance, it's the same level of priority, they all must be done, you'll keep collecting evidence that that's true. And is that the evidence you want to collect, or would you like to start collecting evidence that by doing 3 to 4 mission critical things each day, you can have a thriving, successful business? I know which I'd rather. And when I decided that that's what I was going to go about doing, guess what I collected? I collected a whole ton of evidence that 3 to 4 things a day is all I need to have a successful business. And I'd rather have that be my reality, and that is my reality. That is what I have manifested, if you want to use that kind of language. How powerful is that? Such a great question for us to end on. Thank you so much, Christy, for asking. Thank you so much to everyone who submitted a question. Thank you to every person who has listened this far. 2.5 hour, 500th episode in the bag. Don't forget to come to the show notes of today's episode at tashcorbin.com/500. There you'll find a summary of the questions and the answers, as well as links to any of the resources, past podcast episodes, and products and services that I've referenced in today's episode. Thank you so much for joining me today. Until next time, I cannot wait to see you shine, and I cannot wait to share podcast episode number 501 with you. Bye for now.